This talk is by Leonardo Muller-Rodriguez, Groove as the Musical Glue for Social Bonding.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello! Welcome to today's talk on Groove as a musical glue for social bonding. My name is Leonardo Muller-Rodriguez. I'm a PhD student at Synchrony, and this is a neuroscientific and cross-cultural perspective. Now, I'm a bit self-conscious by the fact that the only audio you'll be hearing today is my voice, no music. But do books sing? No, we're doing a deep dive into the scientific literature, not musical theater. Maybe musical theater in the future of my active inference. Well, my name is Leonardo Muller-Rodriguez. I'm a PhD student at the Cambridge Institute for Music Therapy Research, Synchrony, and my focus is on sleep music for dementias. And if you're curious, how does this tie in with danceability, where it relates to musical entrainment, more specifically slow beats. I'm also a composer, music producer, and musician. So how does Groove foster social bonding? There's a little outline of today's presentation, Groove and its relationship to Spotify's danceability, the neuroscience of it, the social bonding, the cross-cultural aspect, flow states in music, what musical features define Groove, an active inference application of Groove, and a little update to Spotify suggestion. So what is Groove? In essence, it's the apex of an inverted U-shaped relationship between rhythmic complexity and grooviness, and pleasure if you wish. Grooviness is at a moderate level of rhythmic complexity, which is rhythmic complexity is, if you use the musical term, syncopation is the amount to which the rhythm deviates from the meter or the beat, or alternatively you can think of the tempo, and the beat is a tempo, and it relates to how certain you are of your predictions of that rhythm. So groove is a pleasurable sensation of wanting to move the body to music, driven by rhythmic patterns that balance predictability and surprise. Here's another study looking at the same thing, and we'll see into the neuroscience in a bit that proves this. Now, Spotify's danceability is a measure they use, and they define it as so. We don't have the actual computation that they do. It's the suitability of a track for dancing based on a combination, unknown combination, unless you work at Spotify, of tempo, rhythm stability, beat strength or pulse clarity, and overall regularity. And this data sets, someone put this on Reddit, and they've looked at 1 million tracks, and I was like, okay, you beat me in terms of data sets. And so they've categorized all the musical genres, several musical genres, in terms of as a function of danceability. And based on the discussion, and it makes sense, on Reddit, it's more about rhythmic simplicity, seems to analyze, because it's the more danceable music is techno, deep house, and then you have salsa music, which is lower, and people in the comments who are salsa dancers like, well, what is going on? And especially metal, heavy rock, or hard, metal fans that were thinking like, wait, is comedy more danceable than my favorite genre? So they're a bit offended with that. At least sleep music makes sense that it's kind of low. Yeah, so it lacks this relationship between the complexity and predictability. Fun fact, if you listen to all the 1 million tracks, it will take you 7 years and 9 months if you listen to it on a 24/7 basis. Here's my data set. I compared sleep soundtracks, sleep playlists that are either very popular on YouTube or that I've created my own self, or playlists that I have millions of subscribers on Spotify, to high energy music such as gym music that has this beast mode playlist, has 11 million subscribers, or this reggaeton music. With reggaeton is a Latin popular dance music, very popular here, 11 million, and this has about 5 million. And you see the danceability is in general higher for this higher energy music compared to sleep music. And here I compared valence, and high energy music is also more positive. Apparently sleep music is more negative. Anyway, let's dive into the neuroscience of it. And here, the main thing I want you to focus on is the fact that beat perception is present in the brain, and frequencies increase their strength at the onset of the pulse. Here there are different tempos that were used, or different speeds between pulses, and as you see, there's always an increase just after the pulse, regardless of the tempo. It happens all the time, and it happens at the level of beta and alpha brain waves and gamma brain waves, these higher brain frequencies, and it activates these brain regions here, and we'll go a bit more in detail, but it's quite wide range, and it turns out that we can call these the musical rhythm brain network, because it makes use of the dopaminergic and rhythmic, the dopaminergic reward system in the brain for beat perception and positive affect of groovy music. And this involves the supplementary motor area, premotor area nearby, the putamen, as well as for pleasure and the urge to move to the music, is the nucleus accumbens and this connection to the medial orbital frontal cortex. Because we're talking about an auditory stimulus, auditory regions must be involved. And the cerebellum also form fine motor movements. Turns out that musical rhythm predictions and surprises are measurable in the brain in two forms. So the first one is about short-term habituation to a rhythm via repetition of a certain rhythm, and then the deviation from that, the surprising change to that rhythm, is seen here in this paper, where there's this measure called the mismatch negativity, which measures prediction errors in relation to rhythm deviations, changes, or omission. There you don't have that note that used to be in that rhythm. And the other form of surprises and predictions is by the recruitment of long-term memory. Or we can talk about it in terms of implicit music theory syntactic knowledge, where here, regardless of you being told in advance that there will be a non-traditional chord sequence that will be played, you will have this sort of mismatch negativity, which is more specific because it recruits long-term memory. Here is called the electric response in the auditory nerve area. And yes, that's an interesting aspect. By traditionally, I mean traditional music, Western music theory for harmonies. Here again, we're just looking a bit deeper into this, whereby beta waves we saw earlier and gamma waves, the high frequency waves we saw earlier in terms of beat perception, are responsible for top-down, so the beliefs, the predictions, beta, and the updating, the surprises through the gamma high frequency activity in the brain. So, another aspect of music is that it's usually done in groups, such as musical performance, appreciation, music therapy, or learning about music. And it turns out that music in groups synchronizes brains. And this is called interpersonal brain synchrony. And in addition, it recruits the same musical rhythm network that we just saw, with a bit more broadening of it. It has the amygdala insula, which is usually involved in visceral activity, and more generally the prefrontal cortex, the motor areas, it could involve actually moving if you're performing, and the basal ganglia in general, which incorporates all the dopaminergic reward system, which nucleus accumbens and dopaminergic system, etc. Putamen, correct, we saw that earlier. Now, music, the real function of music, beyond the auditory cheesecake that Steven Pinker says, is not just pleasure, not just reward systems. It has to do with social bonding and building trust. Music is a participatory activity, and dancing actually is a way to participate without any musical virtuosity or even familiarity to the music. This is why I call it embodied democratic music participation open tool, and it fosters joy and social bonding. And music strengthens this interactive rituals. You can talk about it in terms of ritual, and it's a social tool for enhancing groups. So as you can see here, you start to predict the beats, you see repetitive motions, this induces groove, induces dancing to it, and this enhances social bonding. Within this sort of, you can frame it within an agent environment system. Moreover, seeing others dance and move encourages dancing. So this reinforces the social bonding aspect. And this was exemplified here, where eyes open with low tempo, high tempo, high groove actually increases the collective movement in a group of people listening to music. And this is what they were measuring here with this cross wavelet. And dance promotes also, here interpersonal movement interaction, promotes self-other integration. It enhances social cohesion through synchronized movements. And more specifically, moderate syncopation, and low as well, for also there's an implication for Parkinson's disease. Low and moderate syncopation, which is groovy music, does so as well. It encourages self-other inclusion with social bonding. And we're talking about music, the groove, and is it applicable to a cross-cultural definition of music? Well, first, there has been, this is with Japanese music actually, there has been an optimal groove tempo range identified, which seems to be not only a inverted U-shaped relationship, non-linear relationship with tempo. This seems to be from 107 to 126 BPM, beats per minute tempo. And the evolutionary interpretation for this is the fact that it's near 120 BPM, which is the optimal tempo for walking and dancing. So this is where groove might come into. Sensory motor synchronization is most optimal in that around 120 BPM. And there are also universals, cross-cultural universals of music, which has been identified using statistics. And the main aspects that are cross-cultural is beat, dancing, making music in group, percussion, repetitive melodic sequences. These are musical features that are universal. Just going a bit deeper into this, they used music from all around these spots. It's quite a geographically varied data set, although only 304 recordings. You know, there's millions of music. But I think it's a nice generalization we can make based on the black box. So the black box here are musical features that are at least 50% shared in globally. And the most, which are the most, you know, the whiteness is shared. The most shared are beat, subdivisions by binary ternary subdivisions, or scales that have up to 7 notes. So this is interesting, and this was controlled phylogenetically, meaning that this ensured that these musical patterns and associations are not solely due to shared cultural or evolutionary histories. Another aspect that is cross-cultural are musical bodily sensations and emotions. What I want you to focus on here is this correlation. They asked Asian participants, 500 people, and Western participants, 500 people, to associate emotional labels to musical features. And there's a very strong correlation, 0.94. Between these. So there's a sort of cross-cultural aspect here. Obviously, it's not all cultures, maybe African, Latin, and Middle Eastern cultures do feel differently. But here's just a Latin influence that's indeed instrumental syncing in syncopated music, which is groovy music, which here was samba, encourages the urge to dance. So groove at least is present in Latin American music. Now, musical flow is not restricted to groove. What is flow? Flow is a state of absorption, total absorption in an activity. In other words, the feeling of losing yourself in the moment. Flow state is usually characterized as a state of emotional resilience against trauma. And here, emotional expressivity is one of those not groove musical features that induces musical flow. And here, the two main things I want you to focus on is the blue histograms, which are states of flow. Here were performers, piano performers, and this is a musical feature. And so there was higher flow during swelling dynamics, so crescendos, decrescendos, which is volume fluctuations, as well as repetition of melodies, and not only just any melodies, but stepwise melodies that are not too far apart in terms of distance on the keyboard, or in terms of notes. So the closer they are, blue is again flow states. The closer they are, the melodies, the more flow-inducing they provoke. Another musical element that provokes flow, that is not groove, is the narrative arc, storytelling, emotional journeys in music. And this interesting paper by a colleague, Annie Heideschet, identified stages, emotional stages of the hero's journey, which is a narrative arc found in myths, films, popular films, and stories, narratives in general. They've identified emotional stages of the hero's journey in patients and clients, specifically in this case was eating disorders, but applying to just more generally, undergoing music therapy. So they were doing guided imagery with music, which is a type of music therapy, and depending on what they're saying, the clients, these themes were identifiable within this the hero's journey narrative arc. So that's very interesting, and this is very important for music therapists because this informs further the scanning aspect that they usually do in GIM, which is that they try to identify using the music where is the emotional stage that the client and the therapist should start their emotional work. And so this is actually emotional journeys are actually a concept that is applied by DJs. They usually talk about energy arcs for their DJ sets, and it's also very prevalent in film soundtracks. Film soundtracks are so music is being used to guide the emotional journey of the audience. Now, flow as neural entrainment. I think neural entrainment is evident for beat perception. We've seen it several times. Here's more evidence, like accurate beat perception increases neural entrainment. Here it's just saying that beat sensitivity, there's a sort of temporal range where this sensory motor synchronization decreases with very slow tempi. But here again, beat perception, this is the beat, is being identified in a neural activity. And even if you imagine certain rhythms, these frequencies appear also in the brain activity. So neural entrainment with beat perception is clear. But how about for emotional expressivity and emotional journeys? Well, this study reconstructed the music that was listened to by the participants from their neural patterns. It was a combination of EEG and fMRI, a technique that made use of EEG and fMRI and deep neural networks to reconstruct the music based on the neural activity. And you can see that not only very impressively resembles quite a lot in terms of spectrogram information, but obviously there's not just rhythm activity or rhythm information that's being displayed. There's more, there's frequency activity. So this takes us to this study that demonstrated that spectral flux is actually the most accurate measure for neural entrainment to music. And you can see this with this red line. It's the highest correlation with neural entrainment. And in addition, they've demonstrated that it is a metric that encompasses amplitude, envelope, as well as beats. They have mutual information here. And spectral flux, or spectral novelty is called, is a measure of novel energy increases in the frequency spectrum. So this is an interesting aspect. Now, nevertheless, as you can see, other strong neural synchronization musical features, in addition to spectral flux, are temporal range. So roughly, as you can see here with the orange line, 60 to 120 BPM, high familiarity with the music, and pulse clarity, easy to perceive the beats. So let's keep it simple. What are the groove's musical features? Two things: moderate rhythmic complexity within an optimal range of around the walking tempo of humans. These two encompass most of these characteristics: syncopation, tempo, microtiming, event density. This has to do with, and even beat salience has to do with rhythmic complexity. Slope of attack is a variant of beat saliency. Low frequency band, as the bass enhances dancing. Volume, and then this is the chord progression and that. Now, keep in mind that sensory motor synchronization is not limited to this groove tempo range. The sensory motor synchronization tempo range is shown to be between 60 to 180 BPM. Below and above this, the sensory motor synchronization, which is usually finger tapping or dancing to the beat, decreases, which is probably linked to biomechanical reasons. However, probably training increases your capacity to do so, to synchronize. However, the beat perception still can occur beyond those this tempo range. I recommend watching this YouTube video by Ada Neely, which goes into this the extremes of beat perception. Let's apply active inference into groove. But first, before we do that, we need to understand that the brain is constantly generating predictions about how the world works in order to minimize the uncertainty about how the world works. 2. The brain is a layered thing, and it balances top-down and bottom-up influences, where higher layers send beliefs about the world down to lower sensory layers, which these sensory layers, as we can see here, actually send back up sensory stimuli to adjust the beliefs through the mechanism of minimization of prediction errors or minimization of free energy. Now, talk about groove. Groove balances confident predictions with surprise about the rhythm. Just reminding you, it is an optimal playing with belief updating about musical rhythms. Now, listening to groove is accessible to groups of people, and therefore can become a shared stimulus for motor and emotional synchrony, and therefore, under the active inference framework, generates generalized synchrony, which means that people have shared world models, the listeners have shared world models. And this is depicted here with this quote. It says, "Neither a model of my behavior or your behavior, but a model of our behavior," quote by Friston. And generalized synchrony actually requires flexibility in terms of your higher beliefs. Because you're trying to model flexibly your collective identity and collective behavior. And because of this and the social bonding aspect, I place musical groove on the spectrum of the rebus hypothesis, which is a relaxed belief under psychedelics. Meaning that it's not as the flattening of the free energy landscape is not as extreme as psychedelics are supposed to do, but musical groove can achieve this through the social bonding. So dancing to the same music not only increases trust and social bonding, but it also allows for individual creativity. Compare an expert dancer and a novel dancer. A novice dancer and an expert won't be having motor mimicry, but they will be sharing emotional synchrony. And this provides the mechanism for trust and bonding while considering creativity of individuals. And you can make use of a federated belief multi-person system to model groove as the shared marginal likelihood that people non-verbally communicate. So because idiosyncratic dance moves have been shown to even increase more the social bonding and trust. I encourage you next time to take the risk and bust on some moves on the on the dance floor. All right. So, what I want you to consider right now is the current models of the context that encourages dancing. Yes, they say musical properties. They have temporal predictions that you can do. It induces pleasure, induces arousal, and this, together with regularity, creates the urge to move to the music. And this will generate motor planning or policy generation under the active inference framework. And this desire to move and in training the body movements creates social connection. But I'd like to add a bit more to this in terms of contextual factors based on the literature review we're presenting today. This is a hypothetical contextual factor framework for danceability. Basically, groove is the mechanism for dancing, but there are several contextual layers that individuals might need to cover before starting to dance. For instance, I have two example individuals, a white individual here, this white arrow, who requires seeing other people, seeing their friends before starting to move, whereas this red individual just requires to feel a change in emotions to start wanting to move. And these layers have a non-linear relationship with the groove, meaning that your contextual entry level to start dancing might be seeing a friend starting to dance, and you might not need familiarity with the music to start dancing, to start connecting to the groove. Whereas DJs sometimes make use of familiar music in their DJ sets to encourage people to start dancing. They say getting those first 3 people to dance is always the most difficult part, and once you have them, the crowd joins and you have a crowd dancing. So this was modeled with a reduction of entropy, to do relatively simply, whereby depending on the distance to the groove, there's a higher entropy level that has a non-linear relationship with grooving. And K is based on personality and the relationship between each layer. There's another way of conceptualizing this as the gravity of groove. The layers are done like this. So, implications for Spotify's danceability. We saw that it's more likely has to do with rhythmic complexity. Comedy is more danceable than blues, apparently, or heavy metal. Headbanging is not as dancing as laughing. Valence as well. The most joyful music seems to be salsa, and the less joyful music is sleep. Maybe Spotify is inspired by the rapper Nas, who has a lyric saying, "Sleep is a cousin of death." So let's go beyond this and beyond rhythm and tempo, and incorporate what we've been seeing today into danceability. So if we want to generate a formula that goes beyond danceability, unknown equation, which is most likely rhythmic simplicity, we convert. First, I want to point you to the study which asked musicians to perform groovy music with simple and complex melodies, and they showed that there's about 30% occurrence of fast notes, specifically 16th notes, when people perform groovy music. And this was also confirmed in terms of listeners saying, yeah, that's groovy. And so here I've just used the optimal groove range and transformed it into seconds, so you can have an idea. And too quick for Spotify. They can't get. No, I'm just kidding. You get to see the equation. So what I've done is I made use of spectral flux, which is this spectral novelty, makes use of Fourier transform, and then logarithmic compression to enhance weakened spectral components, and then you compute the difference between time frames in terms of positive energy increases. And so it measures positive increases in energy. Event density is another measure that's been used in these studies, and it's a number of events, onsets, per time window. So Here's a groove formula I suggest, which is open to your feedback, which is 30% of energy onsets, that is in the 16th of a note time window, divided by a measure that's dependent on the tempo. And a measure is 4 times the beat, because most music is on 4x4 meter music. So I want to give you this quote: dance is an energetic mode of participation for a large population, regardless of age, familiarity with music, or instrumental singing virtuosity. To summarize, we found that groove is a musical mechanism for social bonding through movement, and therefore through movement is danceability, right? And we can make use of the active inference to model groove as a musical mechanism for generalized synchrony, even as federated beliefs to model individual creativity. Further works would encourage the usage of other social bonding metrics in music, such as group singing. Chanting is seen around rituals around the world, and this has implications for group music therapy, live performances, and team building, music recommender systems, etc. So please do contact me. I'm open to collaborate for this groove project and discuss any of your ideas. We could discuss about musical exchange music if you want. And I just want to show here my YouTube channel, which explores, thanks to the YouTube channel, I've actually learned how active inference works. They say teaching is the best way of memorizing. And in here, for instance, I explored Chris Field's work in active inference with the holographic boundary for social interactions, which could also be a further direction of trying to conceptualize musical groove in that manner. But shared marginal likelihood is probably very effective as well. Thank you so much. Please do ask me for the references. I will send them. They have been sent. Yeah. I should be on the chat, by the way, answering some questions. Thank you very much for your time. See you very soon. Bye-bye. Thanks.